The dust cloud appeared on the horizon just after dawn, a single figure moving slow and unsteady across the valley floor toward Marysvale, Utah. And Preston Hayes watched it through the window of the general store, where he was picking up supplies for the ranch. The year was 1878, and strangers were not uncommon in these parts, but something about the deliberate pace of this traveler caught his attention and held it there while the shopkeeper wrapped his order in brown paper. "Someone coming in," the shopkeeper said, following Preston's gaze. "Looks to be on foot." Preston nodded, counting out coins for his purchase. He was a tall man of 26 years, with sun-darkened skin and hands calloused from working cattle and mending fences. His father's ranch sprawled across the valley, 3,000 acres of high desert grazing land that required constant attention. He had ridden into town early that morning to get wire for repairing the south pasture fence, but now he found himself lingering, watching that dust cloud grow closer. The figure resolved itself into a woman as she reached the edge of town. Preston stepped out onto the wooden sidewalk, his purchases forgotten for the moment. She walked with a pronounced limp, favoring her left foot, and even from a distance, he could see the exhaustion in every step. Her dress was the color of faded sage, travel-stained and dusty. A small carpetbag hung from one hand, and she clutched something dark against her chest with the other. She made it to the town square before her knees buckled. Preston was moving before he realized it, crossing the rutted street in long strides. He reached her just as she caught herself against the hitching post outside the saloon, breathing hard. "Madam," he said, keeping his voice gentle, "you need help." She looked up at him, and he saw eyes the color of storm clouds, set in a face that might have been pretty if it was not so drawn with fatigue. She could not have been more than 22 or 23 years old. Strands of auburn hair had escaped from her bun, sticking to her temples with sweat despite the cool morning air. She started, then swallowed hard. "I need to find the church." "There's a church 2 streets over," Preston said, "but I think you need water and rest first." She shook her head, the movement sharp despite her obvious exhaustion. "The church," she repeated. "Please." Preston studied her for a moment, then nodded. "I can take you there. Can you walk?" "I have been walking for 3 days," she said, and there was something fierce in her voice despite its weakness. "I can walk a little farther." She pushed away from the hitching post, took 2 steps, and would have fallen if Preston had not caught her elbow. Up close, he could see what she held against her chest was a Bible, its black leather cover worn soft with handling, the pages yellowed and dog-eared. "Pride is going to get you hurt," he said quietly. "Let me help." For a moment he thought she would refuse, but then she sagged slightly, accepting his support. Together they made their way down Main Street, past the feed store and the boarding house, drawing curious stares from the handful of people already out and about. Preston could feel how she trembled with each step, and when he glanced down he saw her shoes. They were barely shoes anymore. The soles had worn through in places, held together with what looked like wire and hope. Her stockings were visible through the gaps, stained brown with dust and darker with what might have been blood. "Good Lord," he muttered. She did not respond, all her concentration focused on putting one foot in front of the other. The small white church came into view, its steeple stark against the morning sky. Reverend Thomas was sweeping the steps, and he looked up in surprise as they approached. "Preston," he said, setting aside his broom. "What have we here?" "Found her in the square," Preston said. "She asked for the church." The Reverend came down the steps quickly, his round face creased with concern. He was a good man, Preston had always thought, genuine in his faith and his care for people. "My dear child," Reverend Thomas said, come inside." The woman lifted her head. "I am looking for work," she said, her voice steadier now, as if reaching her destination had given her strength. "I can teach or keep house or do laundry. I can read and write and cipher. I am a hard worker and I am honest and I have references." She paused, swaying slightly. "They are in my bag. First things first," the Reverend said. "You need food and rest. Preston, help me get her into the parsonage." Between them, they guided her around the side of the church to the small house where Reverend Thomas lived with his wife, Mrs. Thomas took one look at their unexpected guest and immediately began issuing orders, sending her husband for water and directing Preston to help the woman to a chair in the kitchen. "What is your name, dear?" Mrs. Thomas asked, already pumping water into a basin. "Abigail," the woman said. "Abigail Morrison." "Well, Miss Morrison, you look like you have been through an ordeal." Mrs. Thomas brought the basin over and began gently washing Abigail's face and hands. "Where have you come from?" "Colorado," Abigail said. "A town called Silver Creek." Preston knew Silver Creek by reputation. It had been a mining town, but the silver had played out 2 years ago and most of the population had moved on. It was at least 100 miles north and east, through some rough country. "You walked from Silver Creek?" he asked, unable to keep the disbelief from his voice. Abigail met his eyes. "Most of the way. I rode in a freight wagon for a day until the driver decided his payment should be more than the $2 I had offered." Her jaw tightened. "I continued on foot." Mrs. Thomas made a sound of distress. "Those shoes," she said, looking down. "Child, these are not even fit for the rag bin." "They were all I had," Abigail said simply. Preston found himself kneeling before he quite knew what he was doing, looking more closely at those ruined shoes. The leather had cracked and split, the heels worn down to almost nothing. He could see where she had tried to repair them, crude stitching holding pieces together that should have been replaced long ago. "May I?" he asked, gesturing. Abigail hesitated, then nodded. Preston carefully unlaced the right shoe and eased it off. Her stocking was stuck to her foot with dried blood. Mrs. Thomas drew in a sharp breath. "We need to soak these off," she said. "Reverend, fetch the medicine kit." Over the next hour, Preston watched as the Reverend's wife tended to Abigail's feet with practiced efficiency. The stockings came off to reveal blisters upon blisters, some fresh and some old, several infected. Abigail bore it all in silence, her face pale but composed, one hand gripped tight around her worn Bible. "You should see the doctor," Mrs. Thomas said, bandaging the worst of the wounds. "I have no money for a doctor," Abigail said. "This is more kindness than I had any right to expect." "Nonsense," Reverend Thomas said. "We are called to help those in need. You will stay here until you are recovered. I cannot impose. I came looking for work, not charity. It is not charity to offer basic Christian hospitality." The Reverend's voice was gentle but firm. "Besides, I think my wife could use help with the Sunday school children if you are truly set on working. We can discuss terms once you have rested." Abigail's shoulders sagged with relief. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you." Preston stood, suddenly feeling like an intruder on an intimate moment. "I should get back to the ranch," he said. "I am glad you are in good hands, Miss Morrison." She looked up at him, and he was struck again by those gray eyes. "Thank you for your help, Mr. Hayes," he supplied. "Preston Hayes." "Thank you, Mr. Hayes." He nodded, settling his hat back on his head, but he found himself reluctant to leave. There was something about her, something beyond the obvious desperation of her situation, that pulled at him. The way she held that Bible, like it was the only solid thing in an uncertain world. The fierce determination in her voice when she spoke of working, of being honest and hardworking. "Preston," Mrs. Thomas said, and he turned to find her giving him a knowing look. Would you mind stopping by the mercantile? Tell Mr. Henderson to send over some bread and butter and some of that good ham he has. I will settle the account tomorrow." "Yes, madam," Preston said. He hesitated, then added, "I will pay for it." "Preston Hayes, I will do no such thing as let you pay for our guests' food." "Then let me contribute to the church fund," he said. "Please." Mrs. Thomas studied him for a long moment, then smiled. "Very well. That is generous of you." Preston left before anyone could see the flush creeping up his neck. He collected his purchases from the general store, ordered the food from Henderson's, and rode back to the ranch with his mind full of gray eyes and worn shoes. His father was in the barn when he arrived, examining a mare's foreleg. William Hayes was 63 and still strong as an ox, though his hair had gone white and his face was creased with a lifetime of sun and wind. "You took your time in town," William said, not looking up from the mare's hoof. "Found someone who needed help," Preston said, dismounting. "Woman walked into town from Colorado, feet all torn up," William grunted. "That's so, she was looking for work. Reverend Thomas is putting her up. Decent of him." William set the mare's hoof down and straightened, fixing Preston with a sharp look. "Pretty is she." "I did not notice," Preston lied. William laughed, a short bark of sound. "Son, I may be old, but I am not a fool. You have that look about you." Preston busied himself with unsaddling his horse. His mother had died 3 years ago, a sudden fever that took her in less than a week. In the time since, it had been just him and his father running the ranch, along with 2 hired hands who lived in the bunkhouse. It was a good life, a hard life, but Preston had lately found himself feeling the absence of something he could not quite name. "I felt sorry for her," he said finally. "That is all." "Nothing wrong with feeling sorry for someone," William said. "Nothing wrong with helping either. Your mother would have approved." They worked in companionable silence for a while, but Preston's thoughts kept drifting back to town. He wondered if Abigail's feet were paining her, if she was able to rest, if she had eaten. When Sunday came around, he found himself suggesting to his father that they attend church services, something they only did sporadically. William gave him a long look, but said nothing, just nodded and got dressed in his good clothes. The church was full when they arrived. The whole town turned out for Reverend Thomas's sermon. Preston scanned the pews and found Abigail sitting near the front with Mrs. Thomas, her auburn hair neatly braided, wearing what was clearly a borrowed dress. She looked better than she had 4 days ago. The exhaustion had faded from her face, and though she still walked with a slight limp when they stood for the hymns, she seemed steady enough. Preston tried to focus on the sermon, but his eyes kept drifting forward. After the service, people gathered outside in the sunshine, talking and greeting neighbors. Preston worked his way through the crowd, his father following with an amused expression. Reverend Thomas was introducing Abigail to various parishioners, and Preston waited his turn. "Ah, Preston," the Reverend said when he approached. "Miss Morrison, you remember Mr. Hayes?" "Of course," Abigail said, and Preston thought he saw color rise in her cheeks. "Good morning, Mr. Hayes." "How are your feet, Miss Morrison?" he asked. "Much better, thank you, Mrs. Thomas has been very kind." "My wife tells me you are quite accomplished with the children," Reverend Thomas said. "You have already been a great help with organizing the Sunday school materials." "It is the least I can do," Abigail said, "though I hope to find more permanent employment soon. I do not wish to impose on your hospitality indefinitely." "Actually," Preston heard himself say, "we might have something at the ranch." Abigail's eyes widened. His father's eyebrows rose. The Reverend looked between them with interest. "Is that so?" William Hayes said slowly. "What might that be, son?" Preston felt the weight of their attention and pushed forward. You have been saying the house needs a proper cleaning since Mother passed, and someone to handle the cooking regular like, not just me and you burning bacon. It was true enough. They had been managing on their own, but the house had fallen into a state of bachelor disarray, and their meals were functional at best. But Preston knew, and from the look on his father's face William knew too, that this was more than practical thinking. "We have a spare room," Preston continued. "It would be proper, separate from the main house. We could pay regular wages." Abigail looked between them, her expression carefully neutral. "I would not want to be a burden." "You would be working for your keep," William said, and Preston felt a rush of gratitude toward his father. "It is a fair offer if you are interested." "I am very interested," Abigail said quietly. "What would my duties be?" They discussed the particulars there in the churchyard under the interested eyes of half the congregation. Cooking, cleaning, mending, general housekeeping. They would provide room and board plus $30 a month, which was generous but not so generous as to raise eyebrows. Abigail would have Sundays off to attend church and manage her own affairs. "There is one condition," William said. "You would need proper boots. Cannot have you walking around a working ranch in those shoes." Abigail looked down at her feet, which were still bandaged and shod in a pair of Mrs. Thomas's old slippers, several sizes too large. "I will purchase some as soon as I have earned the money." "We will advance you the cost," Preston said quickly. "Take it from your first month's wages." She opened her mouth as if to protest, then closed it again and nodded. "That would be acceptable, thank you." They arranged for Preston to collect her the following morning. As he and his father rode back to the ranch, William was quiet for a long time. "That was either very clever or very foolish," he finally said. "Which do you think?" "I think time will tell." William glanced over at him. "She seems like a good woman, proud though." "You will need to be careful with that." Preston knew what his father meant. There was a difference between helping someone and making them feel like charity. Abigail Morrison had walked 100 miles on ruined shoes rather than accept something she had not earned. That kind of pride could be a strength or an obstacle, depending on how it was handled. That evening, he went through the small room that adjoined the house, which had originally been built as a hired hand's quarters, but had stood empty for years. He cleaned it thoroughly, replaced the straw tick on the bed with a proper mattress from storage, and hung fresh curtains his mother had made long ago. He wanted it to be welcoming, to show Abigail that she was valued. The next morning, he hitched up the wagon and drove into town. Abigail was waiting outside the parsonage, her carpetbag at her feet, wearing the same worn, sage-colored dress she had arrived in. Mrs. Thomas stood with her, and he could see the older woman had been crying. "You will visit," Mrs. Thomas was saying as Preston pulled up. "The ranch is not so far. You will come for Sunday dinner sometimes." "Of course," Abigail said, embracing her. "Thank you for everything. I will never forget your kindness." Preston helped her into the wagon, noting how carefully she moved, her feet still tender. He stowed her carpetbag in the back and climbed up beside her. "Take care of her, Preston Hayes," Mrs. Thomas called as they pulled away. "I will, madam," he promised. They rode in silence for a while, the wagon creaking along the rutted road that led out of town. The valley spread before them, gold and brown under the autumn sun, mountains rising blue in the distance. "It is beautiful here," Abigail said quietly. "It is," Preston agreed. "Different from Colorado, very different. Silver Creek was in the mountains, all pine trees and rocks. This is more open." She paused. "I like it." "What brought you to Utah?" he asked, then worried he was being too forward. "If you do not mind my asking." Abigail was quiet for a moment, her hands folded around the Bible in her lap. "There was nothing left for me in Silver Creek. My father was a miner. He died 2 years ago when the tunnels collapsed. My mother passed when I was 12. I had been working as a teacher, but the school closed when the town started emptying out. I had a choice between staying in a dying town with no prospects or trying to find something better elsewhere. That took courage, Preston said, or desperation. She smiled faintly. Sometimes it is hard to tell the difference. The ranch came into view, the main house and barn and outbuildings clustered together, the fenced pastures spreading out beyond. Cattle dotted the landscape, and Preston could see his father and one of the hands working near the corral. "This is quite an operation," Abigail said, sounding impressed. 3,000 acres, Preston said, unable to keep the pride from his voice. "My grandfather started it, my father built it up, and someday it will be mine to run." He showed her to her room first, carrying her carpetbag inside. It was small but clean, with a bed, a dresser, a washstand, and a chair by the window that looked out over the valley. Abigail stood in the doorway, taking it in. "This is lovely," she said. "Much nicer than I expected." "You are part of the household now," Preston said. "We want you to be comfortable." She set her Bible on the dresser, her fingers lingering on the worn cover. Preston found himself curious about that Bible, about the faith that made her carry it across 100 miles of wilderness. "Let me show you the main house," he said. The house was rambling and well built, with a big kitchen, a front room, a dining room, and 3 bedrooms upstairs. Preston showed her where things were kept, apologizing for the dust and clutter that had accumulated. "My mother kept everything just so," he said. "We have not managed as well." "It just needs some attention," Abigail said diplomatically, though he could see her taking in the grimy windows and the dishes piled in the sink. "I can have it set right in no time." "We do not expect miracles," Preston said. "Just do what you can." William came in for lunch, and the 3 of them sat down to a simple meal of bread and cheese and cold beef. Preston watched as his father asked Abigail polite questions about her journey and her past, drawing her out gently. She was cautious in her answers, but Preston could see her relaxing slightly as she realized William's interest was genuine and not intrusive. After lunch, Preston took her into town in the wagon to buy boots. The mercantile had a decent selection, and after some deliberation, Abigail chose a sturdy pair of brown leather boots with good soles and heels. "They are very practical," she said, running her hand over the leather. "Try them on," Preston urged. She sat down and carefully removed Mrs. Thomas's slippers, then eased her bandaged feet into the boots. Even through the bandages, Preston could see they fit well. Abigail stood, testing her weight, and a smile broke across her face. "They are wonderful," she said. "I had forgotten what it feels like to have good shoes." "We will take them," Preston told the shopkeeper, pulling out his money. "Wait," Abigail said. "You are to deduct this from my wages." "Consider it a signing bonus," Preston said, "for agreeing to work for us." She looked like she wanted to argue, but then she just nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Hayes. This is very generous." "Preston," he said. "Just call me Preston. Then you should call me Abigail." They smiled at each other, and Preston felt something warm unfurl in his chest. On the ride back to the ranch, Abigail kept looking down at her new boots, and he caught her smiling more than once. Over the next few weeks, Abigail transformed the Hayes household. She cleaned methodically, room by room, washing windows and beating rugs and scrubbing floors. She mended clothes and curtains, organized the pantry, and planted herbs in boxes outside the kitchen door. Most notably, she cooked meals that were actually worth eating, filling the house with smells of fresh bread and roasted meat and apple pie. Preston found excuses to be in the house more often. He would come in for water and linger in the kitchen, watching her work. He offered to help with heavy tasks, moving furniture or carrying water. They fell into easy conversation, talking about everything and nothing, her sharp mind and quiet humor drawing him in. One evening, about a month after she arrived, Preston came in from the fields to find Abigail in the front room, reading by lamplight. Her Bible was open on her lap, but she was looking out the window at the sunset. "Long day?" he asked. She looked up, smiling. "No longer than usual. I was just taking a moment before starting dinner." "You work too hard," Preston said, settling into the chair across from her. "You should rest more." "I like to work," Abigail said simply. "It feels good to be useful, to have a purpose." "You had a purpose in Silver Creek, teaching." Her smile faded slightly. "I did. I loved teaching, but the children left as their families left, and eventually there was no one to teach." "You could teach here," Preston said. "Marysvale has a school. They might need help." Abigail shook her head. "I like what I am doing now. It may not be teaching, but it is good, honest work, and your father has been very kind. You both have." Preston leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "That Bible," he gestured to the worn book in her lap. "You brought it all the way from Colorado. It must be important to you." Abigail's fingers traced the cover. "It was my mother's," she said quietly. "She taught me to read from it. After she died, my father kept it safe for me, even though he was not much of a reading man himself. It is all I have left of either of them." "I am sorry," Preston said. "Losing parents is hard." "I lost my mother 3 years ago, and I still find myself looking for her sometimes, expecting to hear her voice." "It does not get easier," Abigail said. "You just get used to the absence." They sat in comfortable silence as the light faded outside. Finally, Abigail stood and placed the Bible carefully on the side table. "I should start dinner," she said. "Your father will be in soon." Preston watched her go into the kitchen and realized with a start that he was falling in love with her. It was not just her looks, though she was lovely when she smiled. It was her strength, her dignity, the way she had walked 100 miles on broken shoes rather than give up. It was her quiet faith and her fierce independence, and the way she made his house feel like a home again. The realization should have frightened him, but it did not. It felt right, like something settling into place. Winter came to the valley, bringing cold winds and occasional snow. The work on the ranch slowed somewhat, and Preston found himself spending more time indoors, which meant more time around Abigail. They played chess in the evenings, long games where they talked about everything under the sun. She told him about the books she had read, the places she wanted to see someday, her dreams of maybe having a school of her own. He told her about the ranch, about his hopes for expanding the herd, about the way the valley looked in spring when the grass turned green and the wildflowers bloomed. He told her about his mother, about how she had run the household with quiet efficiency while also being able to shoot a rifle and ride as well as any man. "She sounds like she was remarkable," Abigail said. "She was," Preston agreed. "You remind me of her sometimes. The way you do not back down from hard work, the way you keep your dignity no matter what." Abigail looked pleased. "That is high praise." William watched their growing closeness with approval. One evening when Abigail had gone to her room, he poured 2 glasses of whiskey and handed one to Preston. "You care for her," he said. It was not a question. Preston did not see any point in denying it. "I do." "Does she know?" "I have not said anything. It has only been a few months, and I do not want to make her uncomfortable. She depends on us for her livelihood." William nodded thoughtfully. "That is wise. But do not wait too long. A woman like that will not stay unattached forever." The thought of someone else courting Abigail sent an unexpected spike of jealousy through Preston. He had not considered that possibility, but of course it was real. She was young and pretty and capable. Any man would be lucky to have her. Christmas came, and Abigail decorated the house with pine boughs and red ribbons. She baked cookies and cakes, filling the house with cinnamon and vanilla. On Christmas morning, she gave Preston and William each a pair of knitted socks, the wool soft and warm. "I made them from the leftover yarn in your mother's sewing basket," she said shyly. "I hope that is all right." "It is more than all right," William said gruffly, clearly moved. "Thank you." Preston handed her a wrapped package. "This is from both of us." Inside was a warm woolen shawl in deep blue and a new leather-bound Bible with her name embossed in gold on the cover. Abigail's eyes filled with tears. "I cannot accept this," she whispered. "It is too much." "Your mother's Bible is precious because it was hers," Preston said gently. "But it is also falling apart. We thought you might like a new one to use so you can preserve your mother's." She clutched the Bible to her chest, tears spilling over. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you both so much." William excused himself, muttering something about checking on the horses, leaving Preston and Abigail alone by the fire. She wiped her eyes, laughing a little. "I am sorry," she said. "I did not mean to cry." "Do not apologize," Preston said. "I am glad you like it. I love it." She looked at him, and there was something in her eyes he had not seen before, something soft and warm. "You have both been so kind to me. When I walked into Marysvale 6 months ago, I had nothing. No home, no prospects, no hope, and you gave me all of that." "You earned it," Preston said. "Everything you have here you worked for." "Perhaps," she said, "but you gave me the chance to work, and that is a gift in itself." They were sitting close together on the settee, and Preston found himself reaching for her hand. She did not pull away. Her fingers were work-roughened but warm, and they curled around his. "Abigail," he started, then stopped, not sure how to say what he was feeling. "Yes," she prompted, her voice soft. "I care for you," he said. "More than just as someone who works in my house. I have for a while now." Her breath caught. "Preston, if that makes you uncomfortable, I understand. I will not press the matter, but I wanted you to know." She was quiet for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. "It does not make me uncomfortable," she finally said. "I care for you too. I have been trying not to, trying to keep things proper, but I do." Relief and joy flooded through him. "Really?" she laughed, the sound bright and happy. "Really? I think I started caring for you when you bought me these boots." She lifted one foot, showing the sturdy boots she still wore every day. "No one had done something like that for me in so long. Something kind, without expecting anything in return." "I would do anything for you," Preston said, the words coming from somewhere deep and honest. "Abigail, I am falling in love with you." She squeezed his hand. "I am falling in love with you too." He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away, but she met him halfway. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a question and an answer. When they broke apart, Abigail was smiling, her cheeks flushed. "That was my first kiss," she admitted. "Mine too," Preston said, and they both laughed. They sat together by the fire for a long time, holding hands and talking about the future. Preston told her he wanted to court her properly, wanted to do things right. Abigail agreed, though she pointed out that it might be awkward given that they lived in the same household. "We will manage," Preston said. "I will talk to my father, make sure he is comfortable with the arrangement." William, when approached, just laughed. "Son, I have been expecting this since the day you brought her home. You have my blessing for what it is worth." Word spread quickly through Marysvale that Preston Hayes was courting the housekeeper. Some of the older women clucked about propriety, but most people were pleased. Abigail had made friends through the church, and people liked her quiet competence and genuine kindness. Preston courted her through the winter and into spring, taking her on buggy rides through the valley, bringing her wildflowers, sitting with her at church socials. They continued to work side by side on the ranch. But now, there was an added sweetness to their interactions, the knowledge that they were building toward something permanent. In May, when the valley was green and the wildflowers were blooming just as Preston had promised, he took Abigail up to a high meadow on the ranch where you could see for miles in every direction. He spread a blanket and they sat together, eating the picnic lunch she had packed. "This is my favorite place on the whole ranch," he told her. "I used to come up here as a boy to think and dream." "I can see why," Abigail said, looking out over the vista. "It feels like you are on top of the world." Preston took a deep breath. "Abigail Morrison, I love you. I love your strength and your kindness and your faith. I love the way you make a house a home. I love talking to you and being near you and knowing you are in my life. I want to spend the rest of my days with you, if you will have me." He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a simple gold band with a small diamond. Abigail's hands flew to her mouth. "Preston, will you marry me?" he asked. "Yes," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, of course, yes." He slipped the ring on her finger, and they kissed there in the meadow with the whole valley spread out below them and the sky endless above. They were married in June, in the little white church where Abigail had first asked for help almost a year ago. She wore a dress of cream-colored silk that Mrs. Thomas helped her make, and she carried wildflowers from the meadow where Preston had proposed. The whole town turned out for the wedding, packing the church to capacity. Reverend Thomas performed the ceremony, his voice warm with emotion as he pronounced them husband and wife. When Preston kissed his bride, the congregation erupted in applause. The reception was held at the ranch, tables set up in the yard, food and music and dancing that lasted until late in the evening. William Hayes welcomed his new daughter-in-law with a toast that left half the guests in tears, speaking of how she had brought light back into their home and joy back into his son's life. As the sun set, Preston and Abigail slipped away from the celebration, walking hand in hand toward the house that was now truly theirs together. Abigail's room, which she had occupied for nearly a year, stood empty. Her things had been moved into Preston's room, her clothes hanging next to his, her Bible on the nightstand beside the bed. "Happy?" Preston asked, pulling her close. "Happier than I ever imagined I could be," Abigail said. "A year ago, I was walking through the desert in broken shoes, with nothing but a Bible and a prayer. Now I have a home, a family, a husband I love with all my heart." "Those broken shoes brought you to me," Preston said. "I will always be grateful for that," she laughed. "I kept them, you know. The old ones. They are in a box in the wardrobe to remind me of where I came from and how far I have traveled." "We have both traveled far," Preston said, "and we have so much farther to go together." They kissed in the doorway of their home, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built love from kindness and hope from desperation. The years that followed were good ones. Preston and Abigail worked the ranch side by side, partners in every sense of the word. She learned to ride and to help with the cattle, while still managing the household with her characteristic efficiency. They expanded the herd, bought more land, and built a reputation for running one of the finest ranches in the valley. William lived to see his first grandchild born, a boy they named after him. He passed peacefully in his sleep, 2 years later, content in the knowledge that the ranch was in good hands and that his son had found the kind of love he deserved. Abigail gave birth to 4 children over the next decade, 2 boys and 2 girls. She taught them all to read from her mother's old Bible, the one with the worn cover and yellowed pages, telling them the story of how she had carried it across the wilderness when she had nothing else. The new Bible that Preston had given her that first Christmas sat on the mantel in the front room, a reminder of the day everything changed, the day they acknowledged their love for each other. She read from it every morning, giving thanks for the blessings in her life. Preston often thought about that morning when he had seen a dust cloud on the horizon and watched it resolve into a limping woman with worn shoes and a worn Bible. He thought about how easily things could have gone differently. If he had not been in town that day, if he had not offered help, if he had not taken the risk of bringing her to the ranch. But he had, and she had accepted. And that simple act of kindness had grown into a love that sustained them through good times and hard times, through drought and plenty, through joy and sorrow. The boots he had bought her that first day lasted for years, carefully maintained and resoled when needed. When they finally wore out beyond repair, Abigail set them on a shelf in her wardrobe next to the box containing her old broken shoes. Why keep them? Preston asked, finding her looking at them one day. The old shoes remind me of desperation, she said. But these boots remind me of hope. You gave me hope when I had none, and I want to remember that always. You gave me hope too, Preston said, taking her hand. Hope for a future I did not know I wanted until you walked into it. On their 10th wedding anniversary, they rode back up to the meadow where Preston had proposed, leaving the children with a neighbor for the afternoon. The valley spread out below them, green and gold and beautiful, the ranch buildings small in the distance. You ever miss teaching? Preston asked. You gave that up when you came here. Abigail smiled. I teach every day. I teach our children and the Sunday school students at church and the young women who come asking for advice. It is different from a classroom, but it is still teaching. You could start a school, Preston suggested. We have the land and the resources. You could build a real schoolhouse, teach all the children in the valley. She looked at him with surprise and growing excitement. Do you mean that? Of course. You have always wanted a school of your own. Let us make it happen. Over the next year, they built a one-room schoolhouse on the edge of the ranch, near enough to the main road that children from all over the valley could attend. Abigail taught there 3 days a week, while still managing the household and caring for their children. She was in her element, bringing education to children who might otherwise have had none. The years continued to roll by, marked by seasons and harvests, by birthdays and Christmases, by the ordinary miracles of daily life. Preston and Abigail grew older together, their love deepening with time and familiarity. They buried friends and celebrated weddings, helped neighbors through hard times, and rejoiced in good fortune. Their children grew up strong and capable, learning the value of hard work and the importance of kindness. The 2 boys took to ranching naturally, while the 2 girls had their mother's love of learning. When the eldest daughter announced she wanted to be a teacher like Abigail, both parents beamed with pride. Preston was 45 when he found Abigail in the front room one evening, reading from her mother's old Bible. The pages were so worn now that some were barely legible, the binding held together with careful stitching. I have been thinking, she said, looking up at him, about that day I walked into Marysvale. That was a good day, Preston said, settling beside her. I had lost everything, Abigail said softly. My parents, my home, my livelihood. I had walked until my shoes fell apart and my feet bled. I was at the absolute end of myself, with nothing left but this Bible and a desperate prayer that God would provide something, anything, to keep me going. She smiled, touching Preston's face with gentle fingers. And then you were there, a cowboy with kind eyes who helped a stranger and asked nothing in return. You gave me new boots and fed me and offered me work. But more than that, you gave me hope. Hope that I could build a new life, that I was not alone, that good things were still possible. Preston caught her hand and kissed the palm. You gave me hope too. Hope that I could love again after losing my mother, that our home could be filled with life and laughter again. You brought light into dark places, Abigail. You still do. We saved each other, she said simply. Yes, he agreed. We did. They sat together in the lamplight, two people who had found each other when they both needed it most, who had built a life of purpose and meaning and deep, abiding love. Outside, the valley stretched dark under a canopy of stars, the same stars that had watched over a desperate woman with worn shoes and a worn Bible as she walked toward an uncertain future. But the future had not been uncertain at all, Abigail sometimes thought. It had been exactly what it was supposed to be. Every painful step in those broken shoes had led her to this place, to this man, to this life. The hardship and loss had not been meaningless. They had been the path that brought her home. Preston thought much the same thing. That dust cloud on the horizon had carried his future to him, though he had not known it at the time. The simple act of helping someone in need had transformed his entire life, had brought him a partner and lover and friend, had filled his home with children and laughter and love. The worn Bible and worn shoes had been symbols of Abigail's journey, of her faith and perseverance. The new boots he had given her had been a symbol of something else, of kindness and possibility, of a future that could be different from the past. Together, they had built something beautiful from the raw materials of hope and hard work. Their youngest daughter was married on a bright September afternoon when Preston was 52, and Abigail was 48. As they watched her dance with her new husband, Preston pulled Abigail close. "We have done well," he said. "We have," she agreed. "4 good children, all grown and happy, a ranch that is thriving, a community we are part of. What more could we ask?" "Nothing," Preston said. "Absolutely nothing." But life still had gifts to give them. Their children gave them grandchildren, a whole new generation to love and teach and watch grow. Abigail continued teaching at the schoolhouse, though she eventually took on younger assistants to help with the work. Preston managed the ranch with their sons, teaching them everything his father had taught him. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a celebration that brought together everyone from miles around. There were speeches and toasts, music and dancing, food enough to feed an army. Preston and Abigail stood together, overwhelmed by the love and community surrounding them. "How does it feel?" their eldest son asked. 25 years married. "It feels like a week," Preston said, making Abigail laugh. "It feels like forever," she said. "In the best way. I cannot remember what life was like before your father, and I do not want to." The celebration lasted well into the night, but eventually people began to drift away, heading home under a sky full of stars. Preston and Abigail walked through their home, looking at the life they had built. The furniture was worn but comfortable, the walls covered with photographs and children's drawings, the rooms full of memories. In Abigail's wardrobe, the old worn shoes still sat in their box, and beside them, the first boots Preston had bought her, carefully preserved. On the mantel, her Christmas Bible gleamed in the lamplight. On the nightstand, her mother's worn Bible rested, its pages now so fragile they could barely be turned. "I should probably stop reading from Mother's Bible," Abigail said, touching it gently. "It is falling apart." "No," Preston said. "Keep reading from it as long as you can. That Bible has carried you through so much. It deserves to be used, not just preserved." She smiled at him. "You are right. It is meant to be read, not locked away." They prepared for bed, the routine familiar and comfortable after 25 years. As they lay together in the darkness, Preston thought about all the nights they had shared, all the conversations and silences, all the moments big and small that had woven their lives together. "I love you," he said, as he did every night. "I love you too," Abigail replied, as she always did. Simple words, but they contained multitudes: gratitude and passion, friendship and desire, comfort and excitement. They were the foundation on which everything else was built. More years passed, bringing changes and constants in equal measure. Preston and Abigail grew older, their hair going gray, their movements slower. But their love remained strong, a steady flame that had long since burned past the intensity of new passion into something deeper and more enduring. Preston was 60 when he had a scare, a pain in his chest that sent Abigail rushing for the doctor. It turned out to be nothing serious, but it reminded them both that their time was not infinite. They began to make plans, ensuring the ranch would pass smoothly to their sons, that their daughters would have their inheritances, that everything was in order. "I am not ready to lose you," Abigail said one night, her voice shaking. "I am not going anywhere yet," Preston assured her. "I plan to stick around and be a nuisance for many more years." He kept that promise. They celebrated their 30th anniversary, then their 35th. They saw their grandchildren grow and begin having children of their own, making Preston and Abigail great-grandparents. The ranch continued to thrive under the management of their sons, who ran it with the same combination of hard work and integrity their father had taught them. Abigail finally retired from teaching when she was 65, her eyesight too poor and her energy too limited to continue. But her legacy lived on in the hundreds of students she had taught over the years, many of whom came to visit and thank her for the education and encouragement she had given them. On a warm evening in late summer, when Preston was 70 and Abigail was 66, they sat on the porch and watched the sun set over the valley. The same valley where Abigail had first appeared as a dust cloud on the horizon, walking on broken shoes toward an unknown future. "Do you ever regret it?" Preston asked. "Giving up your plans, whatever they were, to stay here?" Abigail looked at him in surprise. "Regret? How could I regret the best decision I ever made? You could have gone anywhere, done anything. You chose to stay in a small town in Utah and marry a rancher." "I chose to stay with you," Abigail corrected, "and that choice gave me everything I could have wanted. Love, family, purpose, community. What more is there?" Preston took her hand, marveling as he always did at how perfectly it fit in his. "I thank God for those worn shoes," he said. "Every day I thank God that they brought you to me." "And I thank God for a cowboy with a kind heart," Abigail said, "who saw someone in need and helped without hesitation, who gave me boots and hope and eventually his love." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the colors fade from the sky. Inside the house, they could hear their youngest son and his family, who had come for dinner. Children's laughter floated out through the open windows, the sound of the next generation carrying on. "We have had a good life," Preston said. "The best life," Abigail agreed. More years passed in the rhythm of seasons and harvests, of family gatherings and quiet evenings, of the ordinary magic of a long and happy marriage. They celebrated their 40th anniversary surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, a tribe of people who existed because two lonely souls had found each other in a small Utah town. Preston and Abigail grew very old together, their bodies weakening but their spirits still strong. They needed help now with things that had once been easy, leaning on their children and on each other. But they remained in their home, in the house they had shared for more than 4 decades, surrounded by memories and love. Abigail was 73 when she finally stopped being able to read from her mother's Bible. The pages had become too fragile, crumbling at the touch. She wrapped it carefully in cloth and placed it in a special box, along with her old worn shoes and the first boots Preston had given her. "These are our family treasures," she told their gathered children and grandchildren. This Bible represents faith. These shoes represent the journey. And these boots represent hope and kindness and love. Never forget where we came from or how far we have traveled. Preston was 77 and Abigail was 73 when they celebrated their 45th anniversary. It was a quiet celebration, just family, but it was perfect. They sat together on the porch in the same chairs they had occupied for decades, watching their great-grandchildren play in the yard. 45 years, Abigail marveled. It seems impossible. It seems exactly right, Preston said. He still saw her as she had been that first day, limping into town with determination in her eyes and a Bible clutched to her chest. She still saw him as he had been, a tall cowboy with kind eyes who had offered help without judgment. But they also saw each other as they were now, aged and weathered and still deeply in love. "I would do it all again," Abigail said softly. "Every step in those broken shoes, every mile of desert, every moment of fear and uncertainty. I would do it all again because it led me here to you." "And I would wait 1,000 years," Preston said, "for another chance to see that dust cloud on the horizon and know my whole life was about to change." They held hands and watched the sun set over the valley they had called home for so long, grateful for every moment, every memory, every sunrise and sunset they had shared. The journey that had begun with worn shoes and worn Bibles had led to this. A life rich with meaning, overflowing with love, blessed beyond measure. As the stars came out overhead, the same stars that had watched over a desperate young woman walking through the wilderness so many years ago, Preston and Abigail went inside together. They moved slowly now, but they moved together, as they had done everything for 45 years. Inside, the house was warm and welcoming, filled with the evidence of a life well lived. Photographs on every surface, children's artwork on the walls, worn furniture that held countless memories. In the bedroom, Abigail's Christmas Bible still sat on the mantel, its gold embossing dulled but still readable. In the wardrobe, the box of treasures waited, holding the physical proof of their journey. They prepared for bed with the ease of long practice, helping each other with buttons and laces, checking that doors were locked and lamps were out. When they finally lay down together, Preston pulled Abigail close, her head resting on his shoulder as it had done for 45 years. "Good night, my love," he whispered. "Good night," she replied, and then, as she often did, she added, "Thank you for the boots." He smiled in the darkness. "Thank you for wearing them all the way to my heart." They drifted off to sleep, two people who had found each other against impossible odds, who had built a love story for the ages from nothing more than kindness and faith and hope. Outside, the valley slept under starlight, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to the moon. The years continued their march, as years always do, but Preston and Abigail faced them together, their hands clasped, their hearts entwined. They had started as strangers, a desperate woman and a compassionate man, and had become the thing that everyone hopes for but not everyone finds. True partners, perfectly matched, loving each other with a depth and constancy that time only strengthened. When Preston was 81 and Abigail was 77, they sat together on a Sunday afternoon, their children and grandchildren gathered for a family meal. The house was full of noise and laughter, the table groaning under the weight of food prepared by multiple generations. Abigail watched her family with deep satisfaction, seeing her legacy not just in the faces of her descendants, but in the values they carried forward: kindness, faith, hard work, love. Preston watched her watching them and felt his heart swell with gratitude. This woman, who had walked into his life with nothing but determination and a worn Bible, had given him everything that mattered. She had made him a better man, a father, a grandfather. She had filled his days with purpose and his nights with peace. After the meal, after the dishes were washed and the family had departed, they sat on the porch again, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. "I have been blessed beyond measure," Abigail said quietly. "More than I deserve." "We deserve every bit of happiness we have found," Preston countered. "We worked for it, built it together from nothing." "From less than nothing," Abigail said. "From broken shoes and broken dreams." "From faith and hope," Preston said. "The shoes were just transportation." She laughed, the sound still bright despite her years. "You always did know how to see the best in things." They sat in companionable silence, holding hands at peace. The journey that had begun so many years ago on a dusty road had led them through joy and sorrow, triumph and challenge, and had brought them here, to this perfect moment of contentment. The sun set fully, and the stars emerged one by one, distant and eternal. Preston and Abigail rose and went inside, their movements slow but their spirits strong. They had lived well and loved deeply, and they faced whatever years remained with gratitude and grace. Their story was not one of grand adventure or dramatic rescue. It was simpler than that, and perhaps more meaningful. It was a story of ordinary kindness meeting extraordinary need, of two people who recognized in each other the possibility of something better, of love built slowly and carefully, one day at a time. The worn Bible and worn shoes had been the beginning. The new boots had been the first gift of many. And the love that grew between a cowboy and a desperate young woman had become the foundation for generations of happiness, the bedrock on which an entire family was built. Years later, long after both Preston and Abigail had passed peacefully in their sleep within months of each other, their great-great-grandchildren would open that special box and find the treasures inside. A worn Bible with pages like tissue paper, shoes that had been repaired so many times they were more stitching than leather, and a pair of sturdy brown boots that had been carefully preserved. They would hear the story of how their great-great-grandmother had walked across the desert with bleeding feet, carrying nothing but faith and determination. They would hear how their great-great-grandfather had seen someone in need and responded with kindness, never knowing that simple act would change both their lives forever. And they would understand, in whatever way children can understand such things, that love is not always lightning strikes and dramatic gestures. Sometimes it is as simple as new boots given to someone who needs them, hope offered to someone who has none, kindness extended without expectation of return. The legacy Preston and Abigail left was not just land or money or possessions. It was the example they set, of faith that sustains, of love that endures, of the truth that sometimes the best things in life come from the worst circumstances, if you have the courage to keep walking, even in worn shoes, toward an uncertain future. And somewhere, in whatever place good souls go when their earthly journey ends, Preston and Abigail walked together still, her hand in his, both of them wearing sturdy boots and carrying hope enough to light the darkness.